we have a special guest lecturer today, Christian Schweizer. He is an architect and city planner and master carpenter who was educated in Germany, and he is extremely talented. He is the person who made real what we call the master builder system, and you'll see a little about it, but it is a system whereby houses and larger buildings can be, the exterior walls of them can be built very quickly through casting the wall in panels that are self-insulated, made of completely non-toxic materials, and have beautiful integrated ornament in them. And Christian is the one who figured it out and built the molds. He has designed many of the most beautiful buildings that those of you who practice transcendental meditation may have seen as capitals and homes of our international organization in Europe, in the Netherlands. And he's designed many, many, many Maharishi Vastu homes and larger buildings throughout Europe and in Africa. And he's quite a brilliant man. And some years ago, he gave a talk on symmetry and beauty. And that talk really stuck in my mind. And we wanted to share it with you. Celia promised you that this talk is live. Christian, sadly, is under a deadline right now. And so he's going to connect with us in about 25 minutes. But before he does, we are going to play his talk on symmetry and beauty recorded earlier. And I hope you enjoy it. And then he'll join us and break away from the buildings that he's designing right now and show us a little bit of what he's working on now, and then answer your questions. I think you'll enjoy this.
Maharishi said in the lecture, when heaven on earth is a reality, then people only will be attracted by beautiful things. Here we see a very beautiful Vastu home with a very well designed and very refined elevation. Why is it beautiful? It is symmetric, and the center here is, for example, highlighted, and the details are done very refined. Why are classical buildings so attractive and gorgeous? This mansion is just a box. The cubature is very simple. This interior design looks attractive because it is symmetric. This Vastu villa, one of the first Vastu houses built in Fairfield, is brilliant and excellent. It is exactly symmetric, and one can see a very orderly grid of columns. The facade and the details are refined, and classical elements like pillars and gables are the basis of this design. So I want to speak tonight on the topic of Vastu and beauty, and how to design nice and beautiful Vastu homes even with a low budget. The first topic is symmetry. To find out what beauty is, the following experiment was done. A compilation of different human faces were shown to a group of people from diverse nations. All of them selected those faces as most beautiful, which were most symmetric. Symmetry is an expression of orderliness, and regularity is considered to be pretty and beautiful. The principle of symmetry crosses everywhere in nature. Symmetry is omnipresent in nature everywhere. Symmetry is the basis of nature and the basis of evolution. Evolution is not depending on mere chance, but evolution and growth is based on symmetry. A butterfly is considered to be beautiful when the size, color, design and pattern on both wings are the same. Birds need 2 wings to fly, fish 2 similar fins to swim. Animals and humans can perceive symmetric structures better than unsymmetric structures. A zebra or a tiger, for example, has complete symmetric stripes on his coat. Only like this the animal can be recognized by the herd to be part of the herd or flock, because only symmetric stripes are perceived by these animals. In biology, visible symmetry decides on success or failure. Visible symmetry is an indicator for inner values and the genetic fitness of the organism. When an animal is able to maintain visible symmetry, then it is more resistant against disease and mutation. Very important, symmetry is a certification for health. A study showed that men with a pronounced symmetric physical body is less ill. Already small children are sensitive for symmetry. If you show them a range of sketches, like stylized drawings or faces, they first pick up symmetric patterns. For asymmetric forms, they do not show any interest. In nature, everything aspires to more harmony, beauty and symmetry, and this is called evolution. By the way, it is very interesting to note that the axis of reflection, the axis of symmetry, is the Brahmastan. The DNA in the center of a cell maintains and preserves the intelligence and contains the information that structures the cell around. The axis of reflection is the gap from which the form around emerges. When water freezes to ice, the water molecules always build a very regular crystal lattice. They always build a six-fold symmetry. From Anomahyan to Mahatomahyan, the self is finer than the finest and bigger than the biggest. In the finest of the finest and the biggest of the biggest, we find pure symmetry. All planets spin around the sun in a symmetric way, and the galaxies show a spiraled symmetry. The absolute pure being is pure absolute symmetry. On this chart we see deep in the heart of the theory of relativity, quantum mechanics, string theory and modern cosmology, a special principle is hidden, symmetry. And the unified field, the absolute, is supersymmetry. All laws of nature have their basis in symmetry. And on the other way, getting more cross, the relative world and structures are the result of infinite breaking of symmetry. If one wants to bring the cosmic, infinite laws of nature into the relative life and arts of architecture, then one should design symmetric buildings. Here we have one quote from Maharishi. The principles give rise to invincibility. Symmetry is the central principle which is used in modern physics to understand and formulate the laws of nature and can be conceived as the principle of referring back again and again. This is a quote of Maharishi's Absolute Theory of Defense. Next. One more quote from this book, Invincibility Through Symmetry. The important point is that when it breaks down, it will be in terms of the breakdown of symmetry. Maintenance of the original structures means maintenance of the full original symmetry. Breakdown of the structure is always associated with the loss of symmetry. That means a structure is maintained when symmetry is maintained, and the structure breaks down when the symmetry is lost. If one wants to bring the cosmic, infinite laws of nature into the relative life and arts of architecture, then one should design symmetric buildings. All considerable and famous architects have understood this. If one wants to bring the transcendental, divine value in his daily life, then one should design symmetric elevations and orderly symmetric floor plans. Like this, the individual is connected with cosmic life. This applies for palaces, for city planning, for gardens, for all designs. Symmetric forms in every age has been a symbol for the divine. Every leader, every Raja, every king has built his residence symmetrical because it is a symbol of power, of divinity, of beauty in every century and in every country. Symmetry is a timeless, everlasting principle. Here I want to show one building that has now been finished in Romania, in Transylvania. And I show this at this moment because the elevation is very symmetric. And also, if you look from the top, it is also symmetric. It is like a cross. That means it has also a gable towards the east and one to the west. So this is a special design in Vastu that is called Chatur Mukh. Chatur means four and Mukh means face. So this is a building that faces all the four cardinal directions, and that is why it is so auspicious in Vastu. And that is like an U-shaped building, but classical elements like gables and arches above the windows are used. I just want to show very nice examples of Vastu houses. Next slide. We come here to the next topic, that is orderliness. Maharishi says, Sthapatya Veda is creating order in nature. Life can develop only from order. Orderliness is the basis for creating and governing the human body. Here we see buildings from the past, and you see the pillars. They are very, very orderly in a very orderly grid. On the left side, on the building in ancient Turkey, and on the right side from Italy, from Venice. And these elevations are showing a very orderly grid of pillars. This design could be a very typical Vastu design. It is symmetric and an inviting porch. It has an inviting porch towards the east. You see, if you orient this building towards the east, you see how it is inviting the first rays of the rising sun. It has a double-story porch then towards the east, and it has on the wings big windows to catch this eastern light, and you see how beautiful this is. Next slide. This modular grid of pillars and arches in a wellness spa are most beautiful. Maharishi said, the most orderly structure is the square. The square creates order in nature. Here we see on the left side the footprint, the floor plan of the Villa Rotonda from Palladio. The footprint is based on a square and is highly symmetric. On the right side we see from Louis Kahn a country house, and the Brahmastan, the center, is a square and has 4 more squares around facing the cardinal directions. Such floor plans are highly orderly and very auspicious. The square is even more strong when it has layers of minor squares within itself, when bigger squares are enveloping the square within. Here we see a city planning master plan, and this is based on a big square. And it has in the 4 corners again squares, and in the center it has a square Vastu and a bigger ring of a bigger square Vastu. And then every single house again has a square Vastu, and you see every square Vastu has again a square house, or the design is based on a square. And on the left side you see an ideal template of a floor plan. This floor plan is square and has 9 smaller squares within, and the Brahmastan is again a square. A grid of energy lines envelop our globe. Every Vastu reflects this grid, which embraces the globe, and like this, living in a Vastu is living in accord with cosmic natural law. And this also has been practiced in the past. Here, for example, we see the city plan of Kyoto, and you see in the center is a square with a green Brahmastan, and then the whole city planning followed this grid aligned to the cardinal directions. Here we see Bangalore. This is also the center, and this was started, the center was started with a square, and you see even in the square the center is not built, the Brahmastan is left open, and then the whole city planning followed these cardinal directions. Here we see Adelaide in Australia. Again, this is downtown. This was started with a square, and it has 4 smaller squares within itself. And if you look more in detail, then even the Brahmastan is left free. And then the whole grid of Adelaide followed this square lines following the cardinal directions. Next slide. Oh yes, one very interesting. This is Borobudur. The footprint of this stupa is based on a square and has little extensions to the cardinal directions. And when one goes up the stairs in the center lines, in the axes of reflections, then we see that this stupa is built up by layers of minor squares within itself. So here we see 3 things. First, a highly symmetric structure, and we saw that symmetry is the basis of creation and that symmetry maintains and upholds a structure. Second, we see the design is based on a square which creates order in nature and is the strongest shape, and a square is also highly symmetric. And third, we see the structure shows layers of concentric squares within itself. Here we see Angkor Wat. This is a very huge Vedic structure, and this Angkor Wat is in Cambodia, and about 1,000 years ago this was surrounded by a huge Vedic city, one of the biggest cities built on earth. And when we look at it, so this design is also based on a square, and it has minor squares within itself, and it is highly symmetric to both axes. I'm showing this sample because the surface of this structure is over and over covered with reliefs. The structure is refined, and by the way, around the perimeter of the building, a hallway in the design of a peristyle is built, and the Vedic epics are chiseled and carved into the walls. So when one was walking around the hallway, then one could learn and understand easily the Vedic wisdom. So here we see the elevation of Angkor Wat, and you also see the hallway at the perimeter. Next slide. And here you see one sample of this hallway, and all the main topics and the philosophy of the Vedic texts and epics are chiseled here in massive stone and preserved for thousands of years. But let's come back to the topic of refinement. What you see, you will become. All high cultures have refined the facades of their buildings. By covering the surface all over with ornaments, they knew that if a building is refined, then also the consciousness of the observer will be refined. A home or building is seen every day, and like that the consciousness of the observer is refined day by day, decade by decade. If you see beauty, the soul becomes also beautiful and full of bliss, and the individual radiates this beauty. Yes, here you will see from Rajasthan some residences or palaces, and you just see the facade is over and over covered with ornaments and reliefs, chiseled in natural stones, and since thousands of years, these facades remain like this. And all the time, all these decades and centuries, the people have the joy of these beautiful buildings. This refinement means being on the path and going in the direction to enlightenment. A person with refined consciousness has success. Yes, here we see from Spain an example of a refined pillar on the left side, and on the right side we see a traditional Vedic column. Next slide. On the left side we see a building, a residence building in Italy. It is very refined and also symmetric. For me this is most beautiful. And on the right side we see a courtyard, an atrium building again in Spain that is all over and over covered with very refined and nice ornaments and reliefs. Yes. Next slide. And here we see an ancient Indian Vedic residence. And all these topics we discussed now, we find symmetry in this elevation. It's a highly symmetric facade. Second, we find an orderly grid of pillars. And third, a very refined facade with refined Vedic arches and pillars. And in both floors, the center is highlighted. Next slide. Maharishi greatly encouraged ornamentation because when you look at beautiful structures and images every day, your consciousness becomes more cultured. Maharishi said, only the best is good enough for you. You deserve it. You deserve the nicest house. One quote of Maharaja's latest book: the effects of architecture differ from other forms of arts because the individual is not only views the structure from outside, but lives within it and experiences its living effect. That is why we invented the master builder system. The master builder system is the precast of Vedic ornaments and integrated wall panels. Here you see how we unstrip a panel for a Vastu fence. Here we see a very refined porch of a Raja house. Here we see how these wall panels, these integrated wall panels, are unstripped from a rubber mold. And here we see one building as it is erected here at Meru. And here we see a more detailed photo of the terrace in the upper floor and the Samran, the stepped pyramid. Such freedom, such abundance, such enormous authority over space and time, such a reality of living in cosmic magnitude. This is living in Vastu. Quote from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. So now we have discussed these three topics: symmetry, orderliness, and just now refinement. And now to the next topic, and this is smrti, the memory quality. Smrti represents the memory quality of consciousness, the memory of wholeness, the memory of one's own cosmic self of Atma, but also the memory of ancient knowledge. Smrti is the memory of the wisdom of ancient, sophisticated or high cultures that are expressed also in architecture. The architecture of all the high cultures have similarities. The buildings are built with and decorated with ornaments and pillars, pillar base and pillar capitals, with horizontal cornice profiles and with plinths. If one uses such architectural elements to build a Vastu home today, then one consciousness is drawn back to ancient, more holistic knowledge, and this uplifts and enriches the consciousness of the house owner. This is the Vastu house of Mayor Ed Malloy, the mayor of Fairfield. And a photo of the entrance porch showed two pillars with classical language. Yes, next slide. In more detail we see this porch, and this building is so nice because it has in front, facing the entrance, facing the rising sun, a two-story pillar which is speaking with the classical form. We see classical pillars, we see a very thick classical cornice profile on top of the pillars, and on top we see a gable. And that's why this building is so integrated and so much beautiful. Here on the left side you see the elevation of the Peace Palace as we designed it in Greece, because on the right side this is a Greece ancient palace, so also we took reference to the local language of forms and designed the Peace Palace like Greece palace, or at least took reference to this ancient pillars. And this Peace Palace is just a box. It's a very, very simple and cost-effective building, but by just using such classical elements, it looks very integrated into this local country, and it looks very refined and integrated. Next slide. Yes, Palladio was a master of reviving the idea of the antique design. And here we see the Villa Rotonda, and it has a square footprint with the extensions and gables to the four cardinal directions. Next slide. And that is what we also implemented in a family house in Malaysia. The footprint is also a square, but it has towards all the four cardinal directions on the ground floor an extension with classical arches, and in the upper floor it also has a gable with extending classical pillars. Yes, this in Malaysia is being built now. This building we are building in Italy near Padua, and we took also a typical Italian design. We call this building, which is also one of our portfolio houses, the Villa Rotonda, Villa Toscana. And you see the symmetry, we see the refinement of the facade and classical elements. I think this will fit very nice in the Italian countryside. This is one of our portfolio houses. And again, this building can be built very, very cost effective, because the basis is just a box. It is just a rectangle footprint. And we put in front four pillars, classical pillars, and these pillars, they also fit very nicely in our time. They are not overdone. They just have a little upper attic architrave, yeah. And the railing on top is done in a very contemporary, very modern way. It is just rectangle little pillars and rectangle handrail. But nevertheless, just by adding this little porch towards the east and having a semi-round window in the upper floor and a little gable above the center to highlight the center, this building looks absolutely nice and dignified.
I want to thank Christian, even though this portion was recorded, for explaining to us how the elements of symmetry and beauty and memory are components of what brings bliss to us when we see them in nature, that they bring invincibility also in nature, and that when we gaze upon them, they help us to evolve. And so building buildings that use these elements are actually good for our own progress towards the realization of our full potential. It was a comprehensive, though very brief talk by Christian, and I appreciate it very much. And Christian is connected with us now, and he is ready to join us. And he, I believe, will be showing us a couple of projects that he's working on right now. Thank you very much, Christian, and welcome.
Yes, I'm so happy that you listened to that nice lecture. So you had some questions about the presentation and lectures?
The first question is, in Vastu, why is there more emphasis on squares than circles and spheres?
That's a very interesting and very intelligent question. And did you know that every 2 minutes, the energy reaching the Earth from the sun is equivalent to the whole annual usage of humanity? That means all the energy, all the cars, all factories, everything moving, all the lighting, all the air conditioning and everything what is used on Earth in 1 week, in 1 year is equivalent to 2 minutes of the sun. That means the sun is the greatest influence on Earth. And then the question is, which time is there interesting? And that is always when there is a change, when there is a gap. And that is the sunrise, because there the night changes into the day, yeah, and in the evening there is the sunset. And if you then connect these 2 points from the east to the west, you get one line, yeah, from east to west. And due to the spinning of the Earth around its own axis, you get the axis of the Earth, that's the north and the south pole. And then you have these cosmic laws of this latitude and longitude, which are covering the whole globe. And from history, always it was known that in contrast to the circle, which symbolizes the heaven, the square points to earthly existence of stability and static perfection. And that is what we want. The square brings on down to earth. And that is what the people want when they build a Vastu house. They want to have stability and success in life. I can explain one example. When I gave a lecture in South Africa, then immediately one person stood up and said, originally all these buildings from people living in the savanna or in the desert or forest, they built square houses like a tent, yeah, and then they could orient themselves. And then after some time, some Westerners came and they said, oh no, it's much easier to build round buildings, yeah. And then they started to build round buildings. And what happened? The children who grew up in these round buildings, when they went out to the jungle, they could not find back the way, yeah. So they could not orient themselves anymore. And that was earlier when they were living in a square building. When they went out, they educated in their brain this sense of orientation very well, and they could orient themselves also when they had been outside. So building a square building, yeah, or a rectangle building is educating what is already in the brain, and that is the sense of orientation, yeah. And in Vastu, all these 4 cardinal directions, they have a specific quality. And in a round building, you cannot orient, yeah. There is no quality, yeah. All the wherever you look, it's the same, yeah. It's not orientation. Maybe John, you want to add something to this point?
In order for the interventions that we build on the surface of the earth, the buildings we construct that we then occupy, to not be out of harmony with the actual environment, with the actual architecture and energy pattern on the surface of the earth, a reality known by physics, the walls that we construct ideally will be aligned with the cardinal directions. And at the simplest form, that means that a building would be a square. However, Maharishi Vastu buildings can be much more complex in shape because you can combine many squares and rectangles in the footprint of a building.
There's a follow-up question to it. Earth's magnetic field changes over the years. How does this affect Vastu?
So this magnetic field is not the main focus. The main point is that, you know, when there is a change in nature, yeah, then there is some transcendental value is coming to us, yeah. And the biggest change is in the morning from darkness to light, yeah, when the sun rises. And that is a gap. And always when there is a gap, yeah, then then very auspicious, healthy, transcendental values are coming to us. That means if you are facing east and looking towards east and orientating the building, the long side of the building towards east, then you will catch all these auspicious, transcendental values which are coming from this direction, and that is independent from the magnetic field, yeah, because the Earth is spinning all the time towards the east. For example, when we are at the equator has a perimeter of 40,000 kilometers, and there we are turning once around in 24 hours. That means on the equator we are moving with 1,600 kilometers per hour constantly towards the east. So there is this cosmic law of movement. It's a huge speech where we are facing every day and every night for over years. And for example, if you are sitting in a car or in an aeroplane, you always want to look towards the direction of the movement. There are people, when they look to the side or backward in the train, they get a bad stomach. Yeah. So the magnetic field is not the point, but what is a cosmic principle. Yeah. We are looking much wider, much more cosmic. Yeah. In all these movements of the Earth and the Sun and the whole galaxies, there are so precisely rhythms, and you can calculate them so precisely. And if there would be only a little thing, a minor thing wrong in this huge mathematic complex, then the whole solar system would go wrong, yeah? And this precision, what is in the cosmic, yeah, laws, we all bring into a Vastu house. That is why the people feel so happy. And so they feel this good fortune in a Vastu house, yeah? Immediately when they move in, they settle down, they see, I'm so full of bliss that I even don't want to leave the Vastu house, yeah, because these cosmic laws are built in every part of that house.
Very good. Thank you. Must a Vastu house always be 2 stories?
No, of course, it can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stories, yeah. You know, nature finds many ways to express itself, yeah. We are not limited in any design style, shape of the roof, or we just should follow the principle which were explained in the lecture, that it should be beautiful, that means symmetric, that there should be some orderliness, but we can always adjust to the local style, yeah? John, is this correct?
Yes, exactly. Christian, you've designed some very beautiful single-story houses, even though in your lecture you showed only 2- and 3-story houses.
Good. There's another question. Would you explain the term axis of reflection and how it is seen in nature and architecture, and why is the Brahmastan considered to be an axis of reflection?
If you see anything which is symmetrical, there are different kinds of symmetry, but the most common kind, and the kind that we see in the human body, and the kind that we typically see in the facades of buildings, is called bilateral symmetry, which means that you can draw a line, usually a vertical line down the center of the structure, and what you see on the right side and what you see on the left side are mirrors of each other. So bi meaning 2, along a line or lateral. So that is bilateral symmetry. It's one of about 9 kinds of symmetries that exist. The second half of your question was, what is the relationship between the Brahmastan and this line of symmetry? Well, the Brahmastan, which Christian spoke about very lucidly in his presentation, is a point, and it is at the core, at the center of most and perhaps all of the orderly structures of nature. And the structure unfolds out of that point. And from a cosmic, from a Vedic perspective, we can understand that the point is the collapse of the infinite organizing intelligence that is unmanifest at the basis of nature. It collapses into a point, and then having collapsed, it can express itself, it can arise out into a structure with physical form. And therefore, the point at the center of a structure is the junction, is the connection between that structure and nature's organizing unmanifest intelligence, which maintains the relationship, keeping that structure a part of the coherence of nature. And when we look at a structure that has bilateral symmetry, then we know that the Brahmastan must occur along that line of symmetry. Remember in Christian's talk when he showed a couple of diagrams that show how, because the Earth rotates to the east around the North Pole and South Pole, it, like all celestial spheres, planets, and stars, has a grid on the surface of it. The grid is composed of squares or rectangles that are aligned due north, south, east, west. This is a reality in quantum physics, and it is a reality that organizes the environment on the surface of the Earth.
There's another question about many Vastu homes are rectangles or L-shaped structures, not squares. Maharishi's own home is a long, narrow rectangle. Would you comment on this?
Yes, so in Vastu, we have a different task. For example, if you build in the middle of a village or town, yeah, and the plot is small, then it's maybe more appropriate to build a square Vastu with an atrium in the middle. But if you build somewhere in the countryside where you have more land, then it is also very auspicious that you build a longish building, more rectangle, with the long side facing east, and try to place the east facade as much as possible. Everybody who entered Maharishi's house and had the experience there, that is a long building with the long side facing east with a lot of windows towards the east. And if you then look out towards the east, you get such a great feeling because you are always facing the direction where the sunrise is. And we just discussed that the rays which are coming in the very early morning, just coming from this gap between night and day, they are so enlivening, they are so healthy. And in Ayurveda, it is even said, the first principle, if you have a disease, you should go out on sunrise and make there a walk and talk. And in a Vastu house, yeah, so you don't have to go out and walk all the time, just that Vastu house is doing that for you. It catches all these auspicious, healthy qualities and brings it to the house, yeah. And some even say that this rays of the rising sun, yeah, this is nutrition which the sun sends to us. These are divine Wagens nutrition which come to us and enliven our physiology and heals our physiology. That is why it is so important to have this eastern quality. Yeah, I think this answers this question. When you have a long building, yeah, with a lot of glass and windows towards the east, that is highly enlivening and bringing one physiology and the personality to enlightenment. Yeah, so you have this option. In Vastu, you can have more square building, but it's also nice to have a longish building. Yeah, just depending on which land and plot you are building.
There was another part to the question, which was the participant was wondering whether there may be L-shaped Vastu structures? And the answer is yes, but only very, very limited circumstances. While Christian has just very vividly described the benefits of an Eastern orientation, there are also some benefits to a Northern orientation. And so therefore it is possible to design an L-shaped building in which the main facade is oriented to the east, but the secondary wing is oriented to the north.
Another question is, it's very interesting that columns are so appealing to the eye. It seems that almost any building with columns looks beautiful. Is it the regular rhythm of the spacing of columns that appeals to humans?
I think this the answer is already mentioned in the question. So what we can see in every high culture, whether it's in Egypt or Greece or Romania or the Maya, always when there had been a high developed sophisticated culture, then the eye text started with the rhythm of columns, yeah, with cornice profiles, with arches, with decorative ornaments, because that is most uplifting, yeah, to the physiology, it seems. And if you look, for example, to the very small items, yeah, like atoms, yeah, and like how these electrons circle around the atomic nucleus and build up the very orderly structure, you see also there this orderly rhythm of the same thing, yeah. If you go to the smallest, you see that. And also from the biggest of the biggest, it seems to be a law of nature, yeah. And if you repeat things, these things get much more strong, yeah. It's like a coherence, like we have in this 1% effect of the Transcendental Meditation group, yeah.
Many of the pictures showed ornate details. Is that necessary in Vastu?
It's not necessary. You can certainly design a modernist building, a streamlined building, and Christian, in fact, has designed many beautiful modernist buildings. If you invoke this element of ornament, it has effects upon you that Christian described. What you see, you become, and if you gaze upon refinement, it brings refinement to you. However, that is not essential. And indeed, there are modernist buildings which are highly refined and which are absolutely beautiful and which surely bring refinement to the countenance of the person who views them. There is no conflict here. You may have your modernist house.
Are Vastu principles and their applications different or the same in the southern hemisphere of the world, for example, Australia?
This is a very smart question asked by someone who's thinking deeply. And the answer is that they are the same. The difference in the environment north of the equator and south is that the sun over the course of the year spends, depending on how far from the equator you are, portions of the year in the opposite side. In the northern hemisphere, in the summer it's in the south, in the winter it's in, in the winter it's in the south, north, and in the summer it's in the north, and the reverse in the southern hemisphere of the globe. We all know this. And so it's natural to ask whether this difference, north and south, has any effect upon the design of Maharishi Vastu buildings. However, the answer is no. And why is that? It's for a combination of 2 or 3 reasons. One is everywhere on the globe, the earth rotates to the east. The sun rises in the east. And so the Eastern orientation is the orientation that connects us to natural law. And there is always the North Pole and South Pole. And the unfolding of qualities of natural law in a structure on the surface of planet Earth, which in turn give rise to the quality associations with different sectors of a house, the placement qualities in Vastu are true everywhere on Earth.
Okay.
We're seeing some buildings on the screen now that Christian designed. If you're sharing your screen, it looks like you are. We're seeing some of his current work designed for
Yes,
the.
that is what we are building now up at Meru at the moment. That is our main focus.
Really lovely, Christian.
One of your masterpieces. Interestingly, a question that came in at the very end that we did not answer was, can one have an architect design modern? And the answer is certainly. And in fact, Christian is quite a master of modern design. He has designed many modern Vastu buildings. And eventually he fell in love again with classical architecture, and this is the language he's working in now, but it is certainly the case that one can design in really any style because the principles of Vastu are deep, deep laws of nature, deeper than any style. And on that lovely note, I want to also thank Christian very much for having connected with us and for having shared with us his thoughts on beauty, symmetry, order, and memory.
And John, I just wanted to say, if anyone wants to be in touch, because we got several questions right at the end from people in Europe, and I typed quickly an answer to them, but if they need to get in touch with us again, or one of the European Vastu architects, please send an email to info@maharishi-vastu.org, or just go to the contact form on our website, and we will get you in touch with the right person.
Ah, that was a really beautiful peek into the architecture of nature from the perspective of Maharishi Vastu. Thank you for your interest in Maharishi Vastu architecture, which enhances peace and happiness in life. Goodbye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. It was a pleasure.